The ancient stones of the crumbling Mayan temple loomed before Ezra Vance, their weathered faces etched with cryptic glyphs that seemed to writhe in the flickering torchlight. Sweat beaded on his brow, not just from the oppressive jungle heat, but from a growing sense of unease that gnawed at his insides. Ezra's fingers traced the rough surface of a jade amulet hanging around his neck, a family heirloom passed down through generations. Little did he know, this very artifact would soon become the catalyst for unimaginable horrors. Kai Hernandez, Ezra's longtime friend and fellow archaeologist, stood at his side, her dark eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "Ezra," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the incessant drone of insects. "Are you sure about this? The locals warned us about the curse." Ezra managed a weak smile, trying to mask his own doubts. "We've come too far to turn back now, Kai. Besides, curses are just superstitions, right?" The words rang hollow even as he spoke them, a chill running down his spine despite the sweltering air. As they ventured deeper into the temple's shadowy interior, the air grew thick with the stench of decay and something else, something ancient and utterly alien. Ezra's torch illuminated crumbling murals depicting grotesque scenes of transformation and rebirth. Humanoid figures twisted and mutated into monstrous forms, their faces contorted in expressions of agony and ecstasy. Kai's breath hitched as she examined the faded pigments. "These aren't like any Mayan artworks I've ever seen," she murmured, her voice tinged with growing unease. Unbeknownst to the explorers, they were being watched. Hidden in the shadows, Atlas Kingsley, a rival archaeologist with a reputation for ruthlessness, observed their every move. He had followed them for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment to strike and claim the temple's secrets for himself. Atlas's fingers caressed the grip of the pistol at his hip, a cruel smile playing across his lips. Soon, he thought. Very soon. As they approached the central chamber, Ezra felt a strange tingling sensation spreading from the jade amulet. The carved stone seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, growing warmer against his skin. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling as an ominous rumbling filled the air. Kai grabbed Ezra's arm, her eyes wide with panic. "We need to get out of here," she shouted. But it was too late. With a deafening crack, the floor gave way beneath them, plunging Ezra and Kai into the yawning darkness below. As they fell, Ezra's last conscious thought was of his young daughter, Lily, waiting for him back home. He had promised her he would return. Now, as the abyss swallowed him, he feared it was a promise he might not be able to keep. Ezra awoke with a groan, his body aching from the fall. The air around him was thick with dust and the cloying scent of decay. As his eyes adjusted to the gloom, he realized they had landed in a vast underground chamber. Ancient statues loomed in the darkness, their features twisted into expressions of agony and ecstasy. Kai lay unconscious beside him, a trickle of blood running down her temple. As Ezra moved to check on her, he felt a sharp pain in his chest. The jade amulet had shattered on impact, its fragments embedded in his flesh. To his horror, the wound seemed to pulse with an eerie green light. As Kai stirred, Ezra helped her to her feet, trying to ignore the strange sensations coursing through his body. "We need to find a way out," he said, his voice sounding oddly distorted to his own ears. They explored the chamber, their flashlights revealing intricate carvings that seemed to depict a horrific transformation ritual. Ezra's skin crawled as he recognized similarities between the carved figures and the unsettling changes he could feel happening within himself. Kai noticed his discomfort, but said nothing, her eyes wide with a mixture of concern and growing revulsion. Suddenly, a shower of debris rained down from above as Atlas Kingsley rappelled into the chamber. His face was twisted into a triumphant sneer as he leveled his pistol at the pair. "Thank you for leading me to the prize," he gloated. "Now hand over any artifacts you found, or I'll leave your bodies here to rot." Ezra stepped protectively in front of Kai acutely aware of the strange power building within him. As Atlas approached, the air seemed to thicken, and shadows danced at the edges of their vision. Without warning, Ezra doubled over in agony as the first wave of transformation hit him. His skin rippled and bulged, bones cracking as they reshaped themselves. Kai screamed in horror, backing away from her mutating friend. Atlas, his face pale with shock, fired his pistol in panic. The bullet struck Ezra, but instead of blood, a viscous dark fluid oozed from the wound, which closed almost instantly. Ezra raised his head, his eyes now glowing with an otherworldly light, and let out an inhuman roar that shook the very foundations of the temple. As Ezra's transformation accelerated, Kai and Atlas found themselves united by their shared terror. They fled deeper into the temple's labyrinthine passages, the sounds of Ezra's agonized metamorphosis echoing behind them. Kai's mind raced, trying to make sense of what she had seen. The carvings, the ritual, the jade amulet, it all pointed to some ancient, eldritch power that defied comprehension. As they ran, she couldn't shake the image of Ezra's face contorting into something no longer human. What had they awakened in this forsaken place? And more importantly, could it be stopped before it was too late? The temple's labyrinthine corridors seemed to shift and writhe, mirroring the horrific transformation occurring within Ezra's body. Kai and Atlas stumbled through the darkness, their flashlights casting frantic beams across walls that pulsed with an otherworldly life. The air grew thick with a miasma of decay and alien spores, making each breath a struggle. Behind them, Ezra's roars had transformed into something utterly inhuman, a cacophony of wet, slithering sounds punctuated by the crack of realigning bones and the tearing of flesh. As they rounded a corner, Kai and Atlas found themselves in a vast ceremonial chamber. At its center stood an obsidian altar, its surface carved with symbols that hurt the eyes to look upon. Ancient frescoes adorned the walls, depicting a civilization's fall to an eldritch plague of transformation. Kai's archaeologist mind raced, piecing together the horrifying truth. "This isn't just a curse," she gasped, her voice hoarse with terror. "It's a rebirth. The old ones, they're using human hosts to return." Atlas, his face pale and slick with sweat, raised his gun with trembling hands. "We have to end this. We have to kill Ezra before the transformation is complete." Before Kai could respond, a massive tentacle whipped out of the darkness, slamming Atlas against the wall with bone-crushing force. The gun clattered to the ground as the thing that had once been Ezra emerged into the chamber. Kai felt bile rise in her throat at the sight. Ezra's body had become a writhing mass of tentacles, eyes and mouths, constantly shifting and reforming. Yet amidst the horror, one human eye remained, filled with agony and a silent plea for help. "Ezra," Kai whispered, her voice breaking. "Oh God, Ezra, I'm so sorry." The creature that was Ezra let out a sound that might have been a laugh or a scream. Tendrils of flesh shot out, wrapping around Kai and Atlas, drawing them closer to the pulsating mass of its body. Kai struggled against the slimy grip, her mind reeling with revulsion. She could feel the alien consciousness pressing against her thoughts, offering visions of cosmic horror and infinite knowledge. For a moment, she felt herself being drawn in, tempted by the promise of power and understanding beyond human comprehension. It was the thought of Ezra's daughter, Lily, that snapped Kai back to reality. The image of the innocent child waiting for her father to return home filled Kai with a surge of determination. With a desperate lunge, she managed to grasp Atlas's fallen gun. The weight of it in her hand felt like an anchor to her humanity. As tentacles wrapped around her throat and alien whispers filled her mind, Kai raised the gun. Her eyes met the one remaining human eye in the mass of writhing flesh that had been her friend. "Forgive me!" she choked out, and pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the chamber, followed by an otherworldly shriek that seemed to shake the very foundations of the temple. The creature that had been Ezra convulsed violently, its mass of tentacles and mouths contorting in agony. Kai watched in horrified fascination as the eldritch form began to collapse in on itself, the alien flesh dissolving into a viscous dark fluid. The tendrils holding her and Atlas loosened, allowing them to scramble away from the disintegrating mass. As the last of the tentacles withered away, Kai caught a final glimpse of Ezra's human eye, filled with an expression of profound relief before it, too, melted away. In the eerie silence that followed, Kai and Atlas stood shell-shocked, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and residual terror. The gun slipped from Kai's numb fingers, clattering on the stone floor. She stared at the spot where Ezra had been, now nothing more than a dark stain on the ancient stones. The reality of what she had done, Mercy killing her friend to save him from a fate worse than death, hit her like a physical blow. She sank to her knees, racked with sobs that echoed hollowly in the vast chamber. Atlas, nursing his injuries from the creature's attack, limped over to Kai. His face, usually set in lines of cynicism and greed, now showed a mix of awe and grudging respect. "You saved us," he said, his voice hoarse. "You saved the world, probably." Kai looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed and haunted. "At what cost?" she whispered. The weight of their ordeal and the knowledge they now carried settled over them like a shroud. They both knew that the horrors they had witnessed in this temple would haunt them for the rest of their lives. As if triggered by Ezra's demise, the temple began to shudder and crumble around them. Ancient stones groaned and shifted, dust and debris raining down from the ceiling. "We need to get out of here," Atlas urged, helping Kai to her feet. They stumbled through the collapsing corridors, the path seeming to shift and change as they ran. It was as if the temple itself was trying to keep its secrets buried, to entomb the horrors it had witnessed, along with the unwelcome intruders. After what seemed like an eternity of running through increasingly unstable passageways, they finally emerged into the blinding sunlight of the jungle. Behind them, the temple entrance collapsed with a thunderous roar, sealing off the eldritch horrors within. Kai and Atlas collapsed on the jungle floor, gasping for breath, the sounds of the living forest a stark contrast to the alien silence of the temple's depths. As the adrenaline began to fade, Kai's thoughts turned to the grim task ahead: how to break the news to Ezra's family, especially his young daughter Lily. The jade amulet that had started this nightmare was gone, but its legacy would live on in the secrets they now carried, and the innocent lives forever changed by their ill-fated expedition. Months passed, but the horrors of the Mayan temple continued to haunt Kai's dreams. She had returned home a changed woman, carrying the weight of Ezra's death and the terrible knowledge of what lurked beyond the veil of reality. The archaeological community buzzed with theories about the temple's collapse, but Kai and Atlas kept the true story to themselves, knowing the world wasn't ready for such truths. However, their silence couldn't prevent the consequences of their ill-fated expedition from unfolding. It began with subtle changes in Kai's appearance, a strange glint in her eyes, an odd discoloration of her skin. At first, she dismissed these signs, but as weeks went by, the changes became impossible to ignore. Her body began to twist and reshape itself in ways that defied natural law, mirroring the transformation she had witnessed in Ezra. The realization struck her with horrifying clarity. The eldritch infection hadn't died with Ezra. It had found a new host in her. Desperate to contain the transformation, Kai isolated herself in a remote cabin, far from civilization. She documented her metamorphosis, hoping her notes might someday help others understand and combat this cosmic horror. As her humanity slipped away, replaced by an alien consciousness that whispered of vast, unknowable truths, Kai clung to one last thread of hope. Lily, Ezra's young daughter, whom she had sworn to protect. On a stormy night, as Kai felt the last vestiges of her human self slipping away, there came a knock at the cabin door. To her shock and horror, she opened it to find Lily standing there, soaked to the bone but with a determined gleam in her eyes. "I knew something was wrong," the girl said, her voice steady despite the terror evident on her face. "I could feel it, and I knew I had to come." Kai tried to warn her away, but to her amazement, Lily stepped forward, unaffected by the miasma of alien energy that now surrounded Kai. As understanding dawned, Kai felt a mixture of relief and anguish. Lily was immune to the eldritch influence, a genetic quirk inherited from her father. She alone could end this nightmare before it spread further. With the last of her human will, Kai pressed her research notes into Lily's hands, along with the gun she had used to end Ezra's suffering. "You know what you have to do," Kai managed to say, her voice distorted by her partially transformed vocal cords. Lily nodded, tears streaming down her face as she raised the gun. In that final moment, as Kai looked into the eyes of her friend's child, she found peace, knowing that her death would ensure the safety of the world she was leaving behind. The gunshot echoed through the cabin, a final full stop to the horrors unleashed in that ancient temple, and a grim reminder of the heavy price of forbidden knowledge.